You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram.
Hi, my name is Bharat Sundaresan, cricket commentator, writer, author, mainly a man of color. And what I do best is tell stories. And you are listening to me on the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast.
Yes, but we move on, Brad, and talk about Australian cricket. And I wanted to touch on some areas here, talk about the men's team, because you've been around them for a while. Talk about the Border Gavaskar Trophy, the Sri Lanka Tests, and the Champions Trophy recently for Australia. And look ahead to the World Test Championship final. The tour of the West Indies for Australia, the test matches there, which is exciting. And then obviously the big one at the end of the year, the next summer, the Ashes. So, Bharat, first of all, the men's team, you've been around them for years. You've spoken to Pat Cummins quite frequently. You've spoken to Marnus, who you're very good buddies with. And Marnus is a weird character. He reminds me of the Energizer Bunny and someone who likes their cheese sandwiches cold. Must be it's on a different planet. Then you've got Steve Smith. Then you've got these legends of Australian cricket, Lyon, Stark, Hazelwood, doing what they're doing, and Smith breaking records. And you predicted his return to form during the series against India, Bharat, and you said, I called it first. He's going to come back. He found his hand. What makes this Australian team so great? And there is going to be a period of transition. Of course, we've seen it with Constance and Connolly coming in. So your thoughts on that, Brad? Why is this Australian team so good? And they've won everything basically since Pat Cummins has taken charge. And the transition phase going forward, we're in for another sticky few years after this current crop of great players finally do hang up and pull up stumps.
Yeah, look, I think firstly it's the atmosphere in this dressing room, and it feels like such a grounded dressing room. Pat Cummins has had a big role to play in it. It's like being fortunate enough to know Pat very well. He's worldly wise and he's curious. He spoke about curiosity. He's curious about the world. He's curious about what's happening in the world, and that I think gives him so much of a better perspective over sport. Like, sport is a part of what he does. It's not the be all end all for him. And then I think that trickle down effect from there. And with this team, I think that I've seen them treat success and failure pretty equally. Obviously, there are some defeats that hurt a lot. There are some victories like the MCG one this time against India that mean a lot to them. But I think overall, whether when they lost the test series in India or when they won the World Cup in India later that year, or so many moments like, the 2023 Ashes, the high of Birmingham and the low of Leeds and the Oval and all of those, I think they're just able to beat
as well.
Manchester, at least they got out of it thanks to Marnus. And just on Marnus, you use the word weird. I have a very interesting relationship with the word weird. I don't think he's weird. He's like me.
He's quirky. He's
quirky. He's just himself. I wouldn't even say he's different. People call me different. I'm like, no, I'm not different. I'm just being myself. So, but he is who he is. And again, that's another huge, I don't know whether it's change or not, but that's a huge factor why this Australian team is so successful, because the atmosphere I spoke about, they're allowed to be themselves. Like, Steve Smith can be Steve Smith, Marnus can be Marnus, Uzi can be Uzi, and Usman Khawaja is a great example of that. He speaks so often these days about finally finding himself in the last few years and just being who he is, what he's wearing, to how he trains and everything else. Till the time you're successful in the middle, none of it should matter. In the sense, like what I said earlier about the work I do, till the time I'm providing you with content and providing you with the product you want, it shouldn't matter what I sound like or what I look like or what I wear. So I think that's been the huge change with these guys. And I just and the exposure that they have to the world as well. Most of them go and play in the IPL, if not the IPL, in the other leagues. And it is, especially if you come from a first world country, spending, even though they stay in lavish hotels and they the life of an IPL cricketer is pretty plush in terms of the way you get taken care of. Just spending 2 months in India every year is a humbling experience. It gives you so much of a different outlook to life. You see, even when you're traveling in the bus and if you just pull the curtain, you see such things that you will never see in Australia or never dream of seeing in Australia. I think that has played a big role as well. And not just what they see on the street, even like interacting with young Indian players, if you play in the IPL, or young Pakistanis if you play in the PSL, they're like, how they've come through the ranks and the challenges that they have overcome. It just gives you a different perspective, right? And then you start like stop treating every defeat like the end of the world and every victory as like, you being on top of the world. And I think they're also, a lot of them are at a stage of their lives where they're partners and husbands and fathers, and you see all these kids running around, and that has played a huge role. I think the more time I've seen
That's
this
always
team,
the case, isn't it, Bharat? You're a changed cricketer once you have kids and a
yeah.
family.
Yeah, and when there are so many of you in that same boat, I think it makes it even better. And it's the same with the one-day team as well. If you throw in an Adam Zampa in there, so I think they're very settled as people. They're settled in their own skin. They're settled as sports people, and I think that's why the dressing room is as settled as it is. So, Champions Trophy was whatever it was. Like, they played only 2 games. They won famously against England.
That's good enough, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. They were maybe 30 runs away from making the finals. Who knows the way that game went? So it's one of those things. So I think, and also what I said earlier, the player power thing has also been a huge thing for a lot of them. They're more comfortable in their futures, like, and they're more secure. And I think about it. Whatever you do in life, that security plays such a big role. And the best contrast I can show is Pakistan. Like, Pakistan dressing rooms, as Jason Gillespie would have found out, you're not allowed to be settled just because of the way the structure of cricket there is. And so, yeah, I think that security has played a huge role. And look, they're just some of the nicest people, nicest cricketers I've met. Like, they're nice people. They can have like normal conversations with pretty much all of them. Like, yeah, and I've grown really fond of all of them. Like, we have like interesting relationships with different types. Like, obviously you said Manas and Pat and a few of the others I'm very close to, but just even the others who I'm probably not very close to, we have a very nice relationship. And yeah, look, I'm just there doing my job really, and then going home and to the wife and the dogs and the chickens. So it's again, so I think a lot of it, and with Pat in particular, I think the one thing we've really bonded over is just, again, that perspective we have on life. For different reasons, we come from extremely different backgrounds, but I'm very grateful that him and Manas wanted to be a part of the Australian story and talk about me. But you could see even the way they spoke about me, that they with Manas, we connect over being who we are and different and unique in that sense. With Pat, it's just like, this perspective, like, we don't, every day is different, and like, there's so much more to life than just like, the high of a victory, or like, you celebrate the good times in your life, obviously you do, but you can't go overboard with it. But at the same time, you can't let every little failure like, drag you down. So I think which is why this team is it's a happy dressing room, and B, also a very successful one.
Yeah, absolutely. You get that feeling from just watching them, how they go about their cricket as well. They're not that Australian team that we used to seeing in yesteryear, being nasty and aggressive. And obviously that changed after Cape Town, obviously, when all that happened. But they just come across as a good team, and they just keep winning because they like to win. So that's what Australian team do.
Again, it's also change. Like, Australia is changing as a country, and that's being reflected right now in the dressing room. I think it'll be reflected even more when it becomes even more multicultural, when Usman Khawaja stops being the only South Asian man to play Test cricket. Like, and I think that will change more and more. Like, when you get people from different backgrounds coming in as well, and then you'll see the dressing room kind of like, reflect the rest of. And I think Australia as a country is also kind of coming to grips with how much it's changing. And so I think it's a good reflection of what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. And especially the way they played against India and Sri Lanka recently. They've done well there, which are pretty good 2 victories. And then the Champions Trophy, obviously. So looking ahead, Bharat, WTC, I think we know what's going to happen in the Tour of the West Indies, obviously, and the Ashes. Where do you see those next assignments for Australia going in terms of the potential success for them in those tournaments?
Look, the World Test Championship final is going to be interesting. Early June as well at Lords. Two great fast bowling attacks. So South Africa are an interesting team. A lot of people have criticized their journey to the World Test Championship final, but they can only do what the cards that they were dealt with. So they won what they had to win, regardless of who they had to beat. But they've got to the final, and now that it's a one-match shootout, they have the bowling, which often is all you need, in a game of that magnitude, and it being a one-off, and with their fast bowlers, they should be in a position to make the most of the conditions, whether it's Rabada or Janssen or Nokia or all those guys. And at the same time, Australia have the bowling attack. So Australia will definitely be favorites. I mean, when you compare team versus team, Australia obviously have the better batting lineup, more established batting lineup as compared to South Africa. South Africa had some young guys doing really well, for sure, in recent times. But the Caribbean, well, firstly, it's good that Australia are going there after 10 years. So I love going to the Caribbean every time I get a chance to do that. So I'm looking forward to it. But it's in the pitches there. West Indies, funnily enough, are very strong on West Indian soil, right? I can totally see them pull off at least one test win. The West Indies, that is, maybe not as famous as the one at the Gabba. Nothing compares to that, but still, I think they will be competitive. I'll be intrigued to see the makeup of Australia's team once Cam Green comes back, who goes where and where he fits in. Does he come back into number 4? And if he does, then what happens to Marnus and where does he bat? And so a lot of question marks. And it's a fun period that we're getting into in terms of Australia. The transition you spoke about, Sam Constis, there'll be a lot of hype around him, as there should be. And the transition of the bowling attack as well will be exciting. I don't see it happen anytime soon. So we'll see the same. The big 4 with Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood, Lyon, and the big 5, I should say, with Boland playing a big role during the home Ashes as well. But I mean, the home Ashes will be funny. We've had so many one-sided Ashes series in Australia that I don't know the last time there was a competitive series. I mean, even when England won in 2010-11, that was pretty one-sided in England's favor overall, if you look at it. So it's been a while since, in the last 3, we know how they've gone. So the last one in particular. But I mean, to use a wrestling analogy, it's a perfect payoff, as they say, right? Sport is beautiful that way. Like wrestling, you can build long-term story angles. So baseball is born out of the destruction of England, the old England in Australia 4 years ago. And
also another point is the pitches as well.
Yeah,
interesting.
Absolutely. They will seem around. They will be similar to what we saw against India, you'd think, which could even the odds, or which could really put Australia ahead if England continue to play. And also, look, they banked so much on Mark Wood and Jofra Archer, in particular, being fit.
He's out for 4 months or something now.
Exactly. The next test he'll play will be the Ashes. So good for India, who will be playing 5 tests in England. But so, I mean, let's face it. Whatever baseball is, or whatever you want to call it, it's all about the Ashes, right? It's like they've thrown all their eggs into one basket. Ben Stokes, it doesn't matter if you don't score a run for another 4 years. Ben Stokes, till the time you are in one piece and you're there at the helm for the Ashes in Australia, it's fine. And similarly, all the other results, if you ask them, will not, all the white ball disappointments in the last 2 years will lead to nothing if they can win the Ashes. So yeah, so it'll be interesting. Looking forward to it. There'll be a lot of drama off field as well. So we'll be busy.
Well, maybe we'll have to catch up, Bharat, during the Adelaide test.
Oh, for sure. Oh, not maybe. We definitely should. Yeah,
absolutely. When I go there and watch a test match in Adelaide. But yeah, that's going to be interesting, isn't it? That series. I think I have Australia ahead with the bowling more so than the batting can hold its own, obviously, but that's where England are going to be tested the most, is that bowling attack. And if you're facing Scott Boland on a lively MCG wicket or an SCG wicket we saw on the test against India, you're in.
No, I have them well ahead, well ahead in the series.
Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting to hear your thoughts on that, Bharat, in terms of how it's going to go for Australia in the next few months. There's a lot of cricket to be played. So thank you for your insights there. And I hope everyone listening and watching will certainly listen to your thoughts on those particular things that we mentioned. Now, Bharat, we finally reached the last topic of our long discussion. I've enjoyed it immensely. We're going into overtime, as you do in a test match. Over rates, extra half hour.
Extra half hour, yeah.
I think David Boone, the match referee, will probably fine us or something, or suspend us.
No. I don't know about David Boone. My wife's on her way back, and I've done none of those tasks that she'd given me, so she's going to fine me for sure. But I'll blame you for it.
Oh, well, when you talk about cricket, Bharat, I suppose that's what happens. But to end our discussion today, Bharat, I asked our listeners to send you some questions to us, to ask you and for you to answer them. So thank you to everyone who sent in their questions on email, Instagram, social media these days. All right, so we'll start with the questions, Bharat. We've got one listener who sent in 4 separate questions. Wow. So we'll leave that last because that's the longest one. We'll just get through the single ones first. So the first one comes from a friend of the podcast, Aran, who's based in India. I've been on his channel many times talking about cricket and all that, which is great. He's got 2 questions for you, Bharat. The first one is, what is the difference between the Indian and Aussie cricket culture? And the other one maybe sort of ties into this as well. Why are there no star worship for Aussie players like the Indian players? Like they worship them like gods and everything like that. So your thoughts on those questions there that Aran wanted you to answer?
I think both are really good questions, and they're linked. I mean, the answers, like you said, Jack, are very linked. Firstly, the second part of it, like why they aren't demigods here, Australian cricketers, or why they aren't kind of worshipped the way cricketers tend to be in India, or even the way Australian cricketers are worshipped in India. I think it's cultural. We spoke about it earlier. Like Australia is an egalitarian country, and everybody's equal. And the one thing I've learned over the years living here and covering Australian cricket, there is that tall poppy syndrome that exists here, where they don't want cricketers in particular to be mega stars. Like they want cricketers, their captains, and everyone to be as relatable as possible. And you see it differently with football stars, the AFL stars or NRL stars, where they can be a bit larger than life. But the greatest example of that in cricket is even Shane Warne. I mean, Shane Warne lived a life that nobody could script. As we know, some of the greatest stars, movie stars and music stars around the world were his best friends, and he lived life at a level that he forget about to the fullest. I mean, he like people said when he passed, unfortunately 3 years ago, he lived like 3 or 4 lifetimes in the 54 years that he got to live. So he was made of a different gravy, but throughout that, he was still very relatable. He was the Australian larrikin. He won Australia over by always being that Australian bloke. And I think he's a great example of why he was worshipped in a different way. He was the kind of guy who any Australian man or woman or any Australian person could just walk up and have a normal chat with. And I think that's the huge difference between India and Australia, and why, despite being a demigod in his own right, Shane Warne was still very relatable and loved for being the Australian larrikin. I mean, even what his dad said in the end, at the funeral, just a beer and a fag in his hand and just loving cricket. So that's who he was. So I think that's a huge cultural change here. So and from my perspective also, there's so much more in common between me and the Australian cricketers than ever was with the Indian cricket. We have coffee at similar places. We go to the same supermarkets or similar supermarkets. Maybe they live in more exorbitant or more lavish houses, and maybe they drive fancier cars than I do. But still, it's all very relatable. And I think Australian society is such that it's an aspirational society where anybody can get anywhere if you put in the hard work, and things kind of fall into place. Whereas in India, it's such a divided society on every front possible, class, caste, all of that put together, that it's not possible. Virat Kohli and I kind of started in cricket at the same time, like him playing and me covering it in 2008. And I've known him for a long time from that period on. He's obviously changed, but I mean, we still kind of occasionally when we meet, we bond over just normal conversation. But beyond the point, there's nothing in common between him and me, right? So I think that's a huge reason why Indian cricketers are never feel approachable. If you're a fan, that is not accessible. But in a weird way, being Indian and being someone from India who's now lived in or now lives in Australia, I get it as well. Deep inside, Indians do not want their cricketers to be very approachable and relatable, because that's when you can build temples for them. That's when they feel like they can be worshipped, because they're at a pedestal which you can't get to, which is very different in an Australian sense. So, I mean, that's just my understanding, personal understanding of how things work differently between India and Australia, and why I mean, cricketers get treated differently.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it's definitely different in culture in terms of how we see things and perspectives. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So thank.
And just to finish off in that, it's also why Indian cricketers love to come to places like Australia and like just do normal things that they're not allowed to do in India, like walk down to a cafe, just sit at a cafe and read a newspaper or whatever it is, like, basic things, go out shopping in Rundle Mall, like those things which they not get to do there, they do over here.
Yes, definitely. So thanks, Aran, for your question. I hope Bharat answered it to best of his ability. Our next question comes from Crick Loves Me from Instagram. That's a cool name. I can roll that. He says, thoughts on BBL privatization. Will this move youngsters to choose to play test over money?
No, look, I mean, that Australia is now pretty much the only country left without private investment when it comes to, among the bigger countries anyway, in their league, right, with the Big Bash League. England resisted it for a while, but then after a point, once the 100 came into being, you know what the 100 was. It was designed to be a product that they could sell, which they have now, with so much more money coming into their cricket, which they needed. I mean, when you listen to Michael Vaughan and the rest talk about the counties and how many of them are struggling to stay afloat, this is the kind of money that there was much needed. And you see the opposition that a lot of former England players have to the privatization that's happening there. Will it happen in Australia? Culturally, they have been very resistant to it across sport, but I still don't think it will take away from the value of the baggy green. I mean, I've spoken to Sam Constis on the sidelines, and he values that baggy green more than anything else. So in a country like Australia, I don't think you ever have to worry about young players. I mean, if you think the kind of players who will get swayed in the other direction are those who could reach a point in their careers where they feel like, the test cap is like the baggy green is so far away from me, depending on which state you come from, and also how you want your life to play out. And we've already seen that happen. Like there have been so many white ball specialists in the last 10 years come through the ranks in Australia. But I think the love and the respect and the reverence around the baggy green will always be there. So you don't have to worry about youngsters or en masse youngsters suddenly deciding to turn their back on test cricket and only focusing on white ball cricket. Well, private investment will obviously make the Big Bash a much bigger league, because that's the one window. I mean, when I've spoken to people, IPL owners and the likes, there's one window on the calendar that they're most desperate to cash in on, which is that mid-December, mid-January, because nothing else happens except the Big Bash mainly. So they want to really cash in on that. So, like, forget about opening the door. Even if like a half an inch of the window gets just open, they'll just come flooding in. So is it, and people like Usman Khawaja have spoken about it being a thing or becoming a thing. We'll have to wait and watch, but I can't see it not becoming a thing in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for your question there. Crick Loves Me. Cool name. I like that. I can roll with that. Thanks for your question. I hope Brad answered it well. Our next one is from Dip2 Kumar from Instagram. And I think we've already answered this, Bharat, I think, in international cricket, but here's the question anyway. The ODI World Cup has always been cricket's most prestigious event, but with the rise of franchise cricket and shorter attention spans, do you see the T20 World Cup overtaking it in terms of global reach and financial value?
Well, it already has in many ways. Like, so the ODI World Cup, that's the thing. Like, even the last one that I covered in India, it took a while to warm up because it was such a long tournament as well. Each team playing 9 matches, so all 10 teams anyway. So it took a while, but then as we got into the business, and business did pick up, and it was fun. It was a fun tournament to be a part of and just to watch. There was such a variety of one-dayers that were played out. So I'm still a big admirer of 50 over cricket. I know people diss it a lot. But in terms of value, the fact that the T20 World Cup gets played twice every year, it's just a sign that it is more financially a better deal. It's you don't have to play it out over nearly 2 months, so financially it's cheaper in that sense. You can have multiple matches in the same day, so and the broadcasters are happy as well. So which is why you have been seeing a T20 World Cup every 2 years as compared to the ODI World Cup.
Yeah, well, thanks for your question there, Dip2. It's quite an unusual name. I haven't heard that name before. But thanks for your question. I hope Bharat answered your question well. A next question from Nate Hayes from Instagram. He's a great guy, Nate. He's a part of Emerging Cricket. We had him on the podcast.
Nice.
Covers mainly USA cricket for Emerging Cricket and Associate Cricket. So he's a great guy. Check that out. On the podcast, that interview I did with Nate, he's got 2 questions for you here, Bharat. So he says, if he's willing to discuss it, I'll be curious to know about how difficult it is in the field he's chosen. Everyone sees the really cool aspects, that he is around the game he loves, that he is around the people he loves and who love him. But I know it's a very difficult road and there's never really any certainty. I'd like to know how he keeps going in these stressful and uncertain moments. That's the first question. The second question is, does he have a difficult time sometimes with the competitive aspects? It can be quite a dog-eat-dog world often times. I'm sure it feels like snubs can be taken personally. So your thoughts on those 2 questions from Nate, Bharat?
Very personal questions, and I love them. Look, to the first question, you're right. I mean, when you see pictures on social media or just me on TV or whatever, I'll be the last person to complain about the life I have and the life that cricket has given me. The fact that I get to speak to wonderful people like you, Jack, and answer questions from great people like Nate. But no, it's not easy. I mean, it's a job at the end of the day, and I think it starts and ends with that. Like once you can tell yourself that it's a job that I get paid to do, it's not a passion project. It really is not for me. I'm passionate about what I do, but it's not. I guess it also has to go to do with my background. I didn't grow up wanting to be a journalist, so I didn't have all these dreams and aspirations of doing what I'm doing. I literally just take each day as it comes, every opportunity as it comes, and give it my all. That's how I've lived life. So I think, but it's not easy. You're away from home all the time. You're away from family. In my case, my wife and my dogs and my cousin, and just a routine life, like your regular life. I don't have anything called a regular life. So I have to make the most of whenever I'm home. And I don't want it to come across as a complaint, but it's not. It really is not. But it's just the reality of the path I've chosen. And so you kind of there are lots of lonely nights, or not so lonely for me because I'm such a people person. I love people so much. I make sure I'm always meeting new people, especially non-cricket people, when I'm on the road, learning more about the city and the town and the country that I'm in. So that curiosity helps. But there are long days and nights by yourself in hotel rooms and in tough Airbnbs. You don't always get paid too well to stay in fancy places. So so you kind of go through all of that, and there is no time to rest. Time zones matter as well. You might be in a time zone where you're catering to 4 different time zones, which means that you're up for 24 hours doing your work. So again, it's something I enjoy doing. It has never felt too stressful for me. I know a lot of journalists get stressed out with what we do. I'm not one of them, but but you're right. I mean, like with every job, there are always the challenges that you have to overcome that people don't see. People don't see the other side, which is why I said earlier, people often come up to me. I've had people in my own family back in India saying, "Oh, I want my son to be you." Well, I wouldn't want for your son's sake. It doesn't have to be anything like me. He or she can have their own journey that they follow. So I think it's so important to keep into perspective, how fortunate and grateful you are to get what you get, but at the same time be cognizant of the fact that there is someone back home, like in my case, my wife and the dogs, who are missing you, who have to go on with their life by themselves without you around. And like,
Yeah.
it's not easy. There are so many difficulties that they have to deal with, stresses that they have to deal with when you're not around. So to be cognizant of that and not just get like over, like, carried away with the good life you have on the road, and which is often quite a good life, trust me.
That's great.
And the competitive bit of it, I have honestly, Nate, struggled with all my life. I'm not the most competitive people unless I'm playing sport. Then I'm very competitive. But like, I'm not the whole I'm better than you kind of attitude. I want to be the best writer in the world, best journalist in the world. Those are not driving factors for me. So in a way, I think it helps because my entire focus always has been walk into every room and want to be the person that brings joy to people. Like, I want everyone to laugh if I'm in the room. Like, don't take me seriously because I don't take myself seriously. So that kind of attitude, naturally, I haven't like developed it. It's just who I am. I think has helped me deal with not being very competitive. Otherwise, this industry can really drill you to the ground. It's an ultra competitive dog eat world, especially now, like, with social media, everybody trying their best to stand out and be noticed. And which wasn't the case so much when I started this. Like, if I knew this is how it was going to be, I don't know if a young Bharat would have got himself into it, because it's people are just trying to, like, elbow each other out of the way to stand out in whatever they're doing. And good, like, credit to them, they're still able to do that. But I have, thankfully, the perspective of this being a job. I do to the best of my ability, have fun while doing it, make sure everyone around me is entertained, most importantly, whether it's because of what I wear or how I am or what I say. But then just parking that over there and just going back and leading a very normal life. I mean, it's not very normal for most people, like watching my wrestling, getting into the wrestling ring and getting booed by a lot of people. Having other interests is so important. Like, if cricket is your be all and end all, this industry can just squeeze you out and chuck you out. So it's very important to have that.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for your questions there, Nate, and great answers there from Bharat. Bharat, we've got the last listeners' questions here,
Cool.
and this one's a 4-part question one, and they're quite large ones. So bear with us, everyone, as I try and read these. But it's from Jihan, our good friend Jihan, who's a regular listener of the podcast, and we've had many discussions on cricket. He's one of those people, Bharat, that doesn't like too much change in cricket and thinks T20 cricket should be used for light entertainment, as it was intended for in the early days. But anyway, that's another issue. So his first question, Bharat, is hi, Bharat. Good to see you on the podcast. My first question is about allegiances. I was born and raised in Kent, England, down the road from the Kent Cricket Ground in Canterbury. I am of Sri Lankan Tamil heritage, and my father has always been a huge Australian supporter. When I first got into cricket aged 8 during the 96 World Cup, I loved the West Indies, but also loved Australia and pretty quickly became an Australia superfan as West Indies continued their dramatic decline. I moved to Australia aged 26 and continued to be that Australia superfan. I live in Western Australia now, but my initial 6 years were in Melbourne, and visiting the MCG in that time gave me goosebumps every time I went. So my question is, are you now a full Australian, an Australian cricket fan, or do you still support India as well? So that's the first question from Jihan. Bharat.
It's easy for me. I've never supported India. Like, not a single day of my life have I supported India for whatever reason. I don't know. It goes back to my upbringing and the way I was. But I just fell in love with the West Indies very early on, like from my first memory in life, like I said. So I've never had to like kind of walk away from my love for Indian cricket and become an Australian fan or any of those things. So that helped. But in terms of allegiances, look, I think the best example I can give you, Gihan, is like when I was there in Ahmedabad for the 50 over World Cup final. It was a surreal experience to see so many Indian people together and there being silence. Like, after a point when Travis Head got into his own, there you could hear the batters calling between each other. You could hear like Rohit Sharma setting the field, which was bizarre in the midst of the Narendra Modi Stadium with like nearly 100,000 Indian fans there. The fact that it grown so silent, but at the end of it, I wasn't happy that Australia won. I wasn't unhappy that India lost, or happy that India lost. So none of that. I was happy that some of like some people I consider my mates, whether it's Pat Cummins or Travis Head or Manas, had one of their best days of their life. So for me, that mattered more to me than Australia winning or India losing or any of those things. And even with the West Indies over time, like when Shamar Joseph did what he did, for a brief second, the only time I've shown any kind of excitement in the press box is when Josh Hazelwood was clean bowled by Shamar Joseph, because suddenly the little boy in me woke up, like the West Indies fan who grew up,
Well, you
getting
helped
beaten
him
up.
get some gear before the Adelaide Test, didn't you? You took him down to.
I did. I bought him an arm guard, arm guard and stuff for his kids. And I tried telling everyone who we met along the way that he's going to be the next big thing of world cricket. Neither of us knew that was going to be a thing, but it became a thing. It was bizarre. In fact, I was at the Cricket Warehouse shop recently, and they kind of recalled that moment when I brought Shama to their shop. So it's funny, just like a few weeks ago.
Now
But
you know who he is.
now, yeah, I think they knew who he was. And I did mention the shop a few times, so they got a little embarrassed by it as well. But yeah, so and again, like when you've been a journalist for as long as I have, in most cases, I won't say with all of us, you do kind of lose that whole you stop being a fan in that capacity, where you live and die by the team you support winning or losing. Like I've been part of so many West Indian losses since I became a journalist, so it doesn't matter that much to you. But there will be moments when it's really something happens deep inside. Like I said, when India won at the Gabba, it wasn't me being an Indian at all. It was just such a great triumph for sport. And I think that, like Shamar Joseph winning that test again at the Gabba. So I think those things matter more than, or even Australia beating India in that World Cup final was such a triumph for sport. So I think those things matter more than, I've never had allegiances, so it's been easier for me. Excuse me. Oh, I thought I had a sneeze coming. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I hope you've answered that well, Bharat, and Jihan will be happy with that answer. The second question out of the four is, was the Indian Champions Trophy victory to some degree a hollow victory? And then Jihan goes on to say the formula of trying opposition teams down with spinners on the slows, saying dry wicket used, and then chasing with Rowett, chancing his arm to get ahead of the rate seems all too familiar. That too with Australia's bowlers missing the advantages of not having to travel, unlike every other team, makes me feel everything was set up in their favour this tournament. Your thoughts? Please not be controversial.
No, look, I don't think the Indian fans or the Indian team will consider it a hollow victory, and I can completely see how it can be surmised in that fashion if you are looking at it from the outside. My only argument with it is once that tournament was designed to be scheduled to be played in Pakistan, and I was there in Pakistan when it became official in 2022, there was India can't. I mean, I don't want to get into the reasons for why India won't go to Pakistan or the Indian team won't go to Pakistan, but they're beyond political and beyond everything else. So the only options that you had were taking the tournament completely out of Pakistan, thereby taking everything from Pakistan, not even the being hosts to start with. The second thing was taking India out of the equation, which was never going to happen because the broadcasters would have backed out because what the Indian team represents. And thirdly, the third option was this hybrid model where Pakistan still get to be co-hosts. They still get something out of this tournament and still have the open opportunity of hosting the final if it is held, if India don't make it. And while India, don't play in Pakistan. I think it was more about India not playing in Pakistan rather than India having all the best advantages in the world and playing in the same venue. That was more an outcome of this tournament being in Pakistan and the Indian team not being able to go to Pakistan. So I guess I was thinking about it the other day. The only way you could have made it fair is what we could have told India, because other teams are traveling, you just have to go up and down. Like you play one match in Abu Dhabi, one in Dubai, and one in Sharjah, just so that you also, I don't know, maybe that could have been fair in some ways, Jack. But apart from that, I can't see any other solution to this issue. It's just the way the hierarchy works in world cricket, the issues between India and Pakistan, which go well beyond just me just explaining them in one podcast, and the outcome that you had, and the fact also that India have just been so dominant in white ball cricket. The one match that they have lost in recent times is that World Cup final to Travis Head in Australia. So they were always going to win. Would it have been felt sweeter for the non-Indian audience if they had won it in Pakistan? Probably, but that was never going to happen. You're talking about geopolitical issues that go well beyond our pay grade. So, yeah, unfortunately, Gihan, I completely respect your view on it. Maybe comes across as a hollow victory, but not for India and their fans.
Yes, and it didn't matter where they were going to play anyway. They could have played in Australia and they still would have won the tournament anyway, so it didn't really matter. So that's the answer to the second question there. The third question, so we're getting through this, Bharat, so bear with us again. What are your thoughts on the future of ODI cricket, Jihan asks. He says, Moeen Ali made some recent comments about how using 2 balls and extra fielding restrictions in the middle overs has ruined the game by heavily favouring the batsman and making it a prolonged, glorified T20 match. My own thoughts are that international cricket should be primarily about tests and ODIs. Ian Chappell said a long, long time ago, around 2007, that he didn't think T20 had a place in international cricket. And to me, I agree with that and think they should only be there for light entertainment. In terms of international competition, that shifts in balance so that we don't just have a random sporadic ODI tournaments every few years where no one really ever played the format, and having T20 World Cups every 1 to 2 years, which continually change hands to the point where it loses any meaning? Or do you think this is how it should be going forward? So your thoughts on that, Bharat?
Some deep questions there, but I think it goes back to what I said earlier, and you mentioned it as well. Unfortunately, Gihan, it's just changed so much. I mean, we just have to accept change. T20 cricket, I know, Michael Holding famously said he will never, ever associate himself with T20 cricket, and he stood his ground. And Ian Chappell, another one who's spoken about it in the past. But look, so many people, not just cricketers, so many people around cricket make so much money, and so many livelihoods depend on T20 cricket these days. So it would be selfish of us, like both me and you, Gihan and Jack, to think otherwise, like of treating it as being this hindrance or this annoying aspect of our sport. It's an integral aspect of our sport, and the amount of money that it brings in many cases. Look at South Africa as a great example, right? Like the T20, without that T20 league, their cricket was drowning. So you're either saying we are okay with that, or we're saying we just have to acknowledge the fact that the way cricket economy works these days, these T20 leagues and T20 cricket are you play a huge role in keeping countries like those afloat. It's easy for us sitting in Australia, India, and England to not think about it on those lines, but it's just the reality, and we just have to accept it. One-day cricket, look, I love one-day cricket as well, and we get. I think the Champions Trophy was a fun tournament to watch. Honestly, overall, like there were the high, like the big scoring games in Lahore and Pakistan, but the tricky ones in Dubai, the turning pitches, and where the 2 new balls were negated by the fact that the pitch was dry and there was spin and there was some reverse swing as well later on. So I think, I'm sure they'll muck around with the rules, try to bring back only the 1 ball, get rid of the second new ball and all those things. But the fact that, Steve Smith, modern day great, finished his one-day career having played just 170 games kind of tells you how few ODIs we play. You compare it to the previous generation and the number of ODIs they played before T20 cricket became a thing will tell you everything. Obviously, India play a lot more than other countries do with
it didn't like cricket, Tendulkar play like 400,
yeah, exactly, yeah,
400 games, yeah.
But even like the likes of Glenn McGrath and Steve Waugh, and those guys played so many more one-dayers than 170. Steve Smith was 16th on the list when he retired, so kind of tells you everything. Considering he's been part of,
and Virat Kohli just played his 300th game in this championship.
300, like yeah. So Virat Kohli, if he had played in the 90s, would have easily crossed 400 by now. That's just the reality. So one-day cricket is going in its own way, and I think there have been other advantages that T20 cricket has brought in as well. So much more variety to how batters approach. I still so now we've reached a point where test match batting can be one way or the other, or in multiple ways. There's the Travis Head way, there's the Cheteshwar Pujara way, there's the Sam Constis way that's coming along, there's the English way. So I think variety is always good in life.
Yes, indeed it is. And the final question that Jihan asks you, Bharat, and we finally got there in the end. He says, my final question concerns the proposed two-tier test system. I'm interested in your perspective on 2 points. Will this system generally enhance the confidence and quality of second-tier teams, allowing them to compete with the top four consistently? For example, I followed the scores of the recent Zimbabwe-Afghanistan series, which seemed to be generally competitive. But can that lead to a step up to challenging tier one teams home and away? And specifically, do you see this as a potential catalyst for West Indies Test cricket to at least go back to what it was at the turn of the century? I ask this as someone who holds fond memories of West Indies Test cricket from the late 90s and early 2000s, particularly at home with the crowds and the party atmosphere, and hopes to see them return to that level of competition. So your thoughts on that, Bharat, to finish off the final question from Jihan there.
Oh, look, I think it's good that Australia are playing 3 tests in West Indies and not 2, which in itself is a great sign. I'm a big fan of that. It also gives me a chance to go back to Jamaica. I haven't been there in a while. But I think the 2-tier system, I'm very intrigued in seeing how it plays out. Like, I don't think, like I said earlier, it won't be as black and white as the top 3 teams will never play against the rest of the world. I can't see that happening. I think, and it boils down to India. The Indian cricket needs the Indian team playing throughout the year, except during the IPL. So they'll need places to visit. They can't just keep playing against England and Australia. So I think what will happen is the frequency of India, England, Australia will increase. Like they've said, so you won't have to wait 4 years for India to come to Australia. They'll come once every 3 years. The same with the Ashes. So there'll be so basically at any given point of time, there'll be some in that configuration. Either India will be playing against England, or England will be playing against Australia, or India will be playing against Australia. So that will be happening a lot more. I don't think that automatically means nobody will play against the rest and they'll just have to play amongst themselves. I just don't see that. Don't forget, India has never won a test series in South Africa, and they won't rest till that happens. That box they have to take. So they'll keep going there, trying their best to do that. And maybe, Gihan is onto something. Maybe it will improve the quality of test cricket for some of those other teams, and West Indies could start competing against. They've had some good wins of late, haven't they? They had that win in Pakistan recently, the one in against Australia we speak about last 2 summers ago, but last year 2 years ago now, at the Gabba. And so, it was last year. There you go. Time just flies. Cricket time. It was last January. It's correct. So anyway, so it might make them more competitive, and I think till the time, again, I keep going back to the players will decide the future of cricket. We're still seeing South Africa churn out highly talented cricketers, New Zealand churning out highly talented cricketers, Sri Lanka. I was very disappointed with the way they played against Australia, but they have some great talents as well right now, whether it's coming to Mendes with the bat or the bowlers that they keep producing. And England, obviously they won that test match in England last year. So I think they will continue to be competitive till the players still keep coming through. And I keep saying this over and over again. I don't think we have to worry about test cricket. It won't look the same way it did back in our day when we were growing up, but it'll still survive and it'll still be important, and we'll still have enough to, love about test cricket for a long time to come.
Yeah, hopefully. And thank you, Jihan, for your questions here. And thank you to everyone who sent in their questions to Bharat. He answered them professionally, as he always does, to the best of his ability, as you would expect from a very award-winning journalist like himself. Well, Bharat, thank you for joining me today for this cricket discussion. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I've learned so much from our chat today about cricket and life and other things. And I'm sure everyone listening and watching the episode today has as well. So, Bharat, if people want to get in touch with you, or in terms of accessing your work and other things, where can people do that?
A bunch of places. I write regularly for Cricket Buzz, who I'm contracted with. I write weekly for my columns for the Australian when I'm not on tour. So you'll see my column. Funnily enough, this is the first weekend in a long time I've not written a column. But so I write the weekend columns for the Australian as their cricket columnist when I'm at home or on the road. It's every day. SEN, I'm on SEN all the time when there's test cricket on, or just like doing 2 or 3 radio crosses every week. Channel 7 I do during the cricket summer and every other opportunity they have and I have to work with each other. I do a lot of work for the ABC on TV, so you'll see me popping up here in Australia anyway on Breakfast TV and other Offsiders and those shows. Like, I'll be my colorful self, I guess. I am on social media, on Twitter at BeastieBoy07. Don't ask me the origins of that name. It's a long story. I'm on Instagram at, I think, Bharat.Sund. Just put my name in, you'll find me. So, you can get in touch with me on either of those platforms. I'm generally always very welcoming and I love a chat. So reach out to me if you're listening to this. But most importantly, thank you so much for having me on the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast, Jack. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to another South Aussie.
Yeah, absolutely, Bharat. And let's hope they win the Sheffield Shield. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we will. Don't worry. Yeah, the time is now.
No, we've got it after 30 years. But we'll leave links to those in the description of this episode for people to check out. Also, the link to the Australian Story episode as well from Bharat on the ABC.
Thank you.
It's a much watch. I can really testify that, being infused by it and watching that. And sure, Bharat will say the same thing, of course. Not like he wants to, really pump his name out there, but
No.
but it's definitely a great episode to watch. So we'll leave a link to that as well in the description of this episode. Before we go, remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Also, the podcast is available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Once again, thank you, Bharat, for joining me today for today's cricket discussion. I hope all of you watching or listening to this cricket discussion learned a lot about Bharat and, of course, on the game of cricket. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.